Hey everyone, welcome to our Module 11, Assessing Writing. I can't believe it, but we only have one more after this. That seems crazy to me. Okay, I have a lot to cover in this one, and I'm going to try to do it quickly and efficiently so that you're not sitting here watching a lecture for 1,000 years, but also to be able to get you everything you need to know about assessing writing. First of all, I am behind schedule. Um, my children's district went remote on Wednesday. We got the announcement. Um, Actually, it was on, maybe it was Thursday. Honestly, I don't remember. This week was a blur. Um, they went, there was a lot going on. As I've noted, my middle child is emotionally impaired, and we had some issues with his special ed things this week. We had parent teacher conferences virtually for my kids this week. And then on Thursday, we found out my district that I teach in was going to be going virtual. And so everything that I had planned on doing, all of my time that I usually work on these modules and work on grading, kind of got pushed to the back burner so that I could get my students and my children's schedules figured out. So everything, I'm going to be grading quite a bit this week. Also, I am aware that my interview is not up yet. If you're actually, if you're watching this anytime after Monday, it is up. But I had it. That's another thing that happened this week. I recorded it at school when I was all professional looking and sitting at my desk, and it was great. And then it saved as an MP3, which is only audio, and that wasn't going to work. So I was going to try to do it again on Friday, and then we weren't in school on Friday, and life was weird. So I am going to do it tomorrow before I have my virtual sessions with my students so that I can get it up by end of the day tomorrow on Monday. So bear with me. I need grace as well as you do on some things. After this week, all of the assignments that you'll have in this class will have been assigned. There won't be anything new coming up other than article of the week responses coming after this. So that's kind of exciting. It's also kind of weird to me that it's gone that quickly. We are getting really close to the finish line. I purposely left the last few weeks without a bunch of new assignments to give you as much in reading, to give you as much time as you will need to work on your final things, your philosophy of teaching statement and your lesson design, and to reach out to me if you need to. In fact, let's look a minute at I want to look at our schedule here. So this is this week. We're talking about assessments, and you'll have this assignment, assessing student writing project, to do this week. But after that, I've left. We have nothing coming up during the week of Thanksgiving that's due. Just have a good break, a rest, a catch up time, whatever you need. And then the week of November 30, we'll have our last module. Right now, it says the reading writing connection, but we have talked about that an awful lot. So I'm looking, and a lot of you asked, I noticed in the questions for me for the interview, there were a lot of questions about co-teaching and things like that, even after Julie and some other things. So I might redo this last module to be about teaching students with disabilities, IEPs, accommodations, and those things, just to give you that extra oomph there about those things. But the only things that will be new are responding to articles of the week, or if you're one of the 3 people who haven't done an article of the week yet, posting that. So you'll have all of this time to continue working. And then this week, again, I have nothing due the week of December 11, and really also the week of December, the week of December 11, there's nothing due, but I will hold WebEx conferences for anyone who wants to talk directly to me about anything. I will have some times set up for those, and I'll put a sign up closer to that due date. And then this week, the only thing that will be due, obviously, is the finals, because that's the final week. So we are inching closer to that end line, and so I'm trying to give you the time that you need to get those things done. And then, like I said, no module next week because it will be Thanksgiving week. And then our next lecture, I'll post it on Sunday, November 29, by 11:30 at night. All right, so this week you'll respond to articles of the week 19 and 20. I posted article of the week 19 up there, and Laura's going to do number 20. And in the spirit of myself needing grace, I also gave her a little bit of grace. She needed an extra day, and she absolutely can have that. I don't think any of us will complain about that. So she will do that. And then next week, post by the end of this week. Oh, it says respond during Thanksgiving break. You do not have to do that. In fact, I don't want anybody to think they have to do that. So this is not, you can tell I made these before. Okay. So Taylor and Maley will post articles of the week 21 and 22 next week. And then our very last ones, Ashley and Karen have our last ones that are due up by December 6th. So I'm telling you, we're getting there. So that's articles of the week. My interview will be up sometime on Monday for you to watch and respond to. If you have not yet submitted your peer response feedback for the philosophy of teaching statement I sent you, please do that. There's a drop box for that. And then the last thing is to complete the assessing student writing assignment, which I'll get to at the end of this lecture, because we're talking about assessing student writing. All right, so there are two kinds of assessments that you'll be doing, and I don't know how much you've learned about them in your ed class. Ed classes is just general, but we have assessment for learning, and we have assessment for like evaluation, and they're two different things. And I just kind of wanted to show you all what it looks like in the writing classroom. So we're going to start with assessment for learning. These are normally called formative assessments. They kind of cover these questions of what writing skills and knowledge do my students need to acquire? What do they already know? What skills do they have and knowledge do they have right now? And then how do I help them to go from what they know to what they need to acquire? So all formative assessments are not necessarily for grading. They're to help you know how to teach and know what to teach your students. All right, so these are going to be the 5 activities that we kind of work through in this lecture for formative assessment. First one will be clarifying criteria for success. In my own classroom, we call it literally success criteria. Those are the words that we use with our students. Eliciting samples of students' performances, providing students with feedback that moves them forward, engaging them in peer sports, and then helping them take ownership of their learning. So the first one is clarifying criteria for success. Usually, the standard from the Common Core State Standards that you're teaching put into student-friendly language is going to be your criteria for success. So, for instance, I will use transition words in my story. That is something from the narrative Common Core State Standard. You would turn it into something that the students know what it means. Usually it's an I will statement. You use examples. clarifying criteria, you would use examples to show what it is that you want. So if you're looking at transition words in my story, you would use mentor texts to show how writers use transitions. And then you would use varying levels of student samples to show this as well. You want to show, obviously, anonymously. You want to show students who do a really good job of it, kind of an average job, and students who aren't doing it well at all, so that students can kind of have a range finding for what the success is going to look like. You want to use rubrics, either that you've developed yourself and that you go over with them. For the younger kids, those can just be checklists, yes, no, or yes or not yet. Older kids, I've developed collaboratively with my students. We will look at a mentor text and a student sample that I feel does what I want them to do in their writing. And I'll say to them, if we're going to do this, what do you think our writing needs? For instance, we used a poem as a mentor text, and I wanted my students to read the poem and then write their own, mimicking the same moves that the poet used. And so together we came up with a criteria for success on, well, what does everybody's need then if it's going to be successful? That's a little bit harder to do with the younger grades, but you can still ask them. That helps what do you notice? What do you notice about this? What does it do well? And then lastly, you would set goals then for the assignment. Okay, we're going to learn this in this amount of time, or I'm going to score a 3 out of 3 on using transitions, or I'm going to use first, second, last type transitions. You're going to set goals with the students, the I will goals. The next activity is eliciting samples of students' performance. So this actually starts during your clarifying criteria activity. This is when you're looking at those mentor texts or at the student samples and you're asking questions. You can use things like response cards. I've done this with my students where we put something up and I'm like, okay, does this piece of writing have, a good thesis statement? I don't actually teach thesis statements anymore, but claim, that's what we use now. Claim. Does this essay have a claim? And kids will hold up a yes card or a no card or a green card or a red card that shows yes. And that's a really easy formative way for me to look out and see, do they get what a claim is? Because if there's a lot of greens and reds scattered about, maybe we need to do some reteaching a minute, or maybe I need to ask some clarifying questions of, okay, well, where is it if it's there? Because if I'm seeing a bunch of green and I know there's no claim statement, then I want to know what they think is the claim. I've also done this with everybody in the class getting the same sample, but I put them in groups. Obviously, I don't do this right now with COVID, but it works really well. They'll all have the same essay, and I'll put them in groups of like 4, hand them a whiteboard and say somebody has to be the writer. And sometimes I just tell them, you're the writer here. Hand them a whiteboard and a dry erase marker, and I have them read through, and I'm like, okay, tell me what the claim is in this essay. And as a group, they have to decide what the claim is and write it on the whiteboard. And then I can go around and ask and see what they think. And then I will ask I'll ask each group to report out, or I will ask each group to find a different thing. I'll ask one group to find the claim. I'll ask another group to find what is one piece of evidence. I will ask another group to find, some some reasoning that they used, or the second evidence, or what, so on and so forth, around when we're doing argumentative. And then that way they're sharing out around the room, and we're looking at whether or not they're understanding what I taught. You can also use pre-tests to before you actually instruct. This is kind of like, you can give a kid, I've done this before too, where I'll ask them to write something short in that genre. I will say, okay, I'm going to give you 15 minutes. I want you to tell me a story about something exciting that has happened in your life. And I'll give them time and we'll talk about, okay, what makes a good story? What did you do in your story that worked? What didn't work or whatever? That kind of gives us all an idea of, okay, where are they? Do they know how to do they know the parts already? Where do I need to jump in with my narrative teaching? Or I will give them a pretest before I teach parts of a narrative where I'll say, read this student sample, and it will, usually it's one that has both good and bad things in it. And I'll say, tell me what the strengths are and tell me what the weaknesses are. That also helps me to know, what do they know about narrative writing? You can also use brief writes and prompts during your guided practice, small chunks at a time, like quick writes. I always call them, I don't call them brief writes, I call them quick writes. Writing from images, you can have them switch short little paragraphs, and I don't generally have them score those things. I generally have them write one thing it does well, one thing that you wonder about maybe could be better. And that kind of gives you an idea of where they are at the beginning. You can use exit tickets. These are big in my classroom. I use exit tickets a lot to check for understanding. Pretty much every day they have some sort of exit ticket. I don't call them exit tickets though, because the kids are onto that lingo. And if you say exit ticket, they're like about it. So I just say, okay, before you leave, take the sticky note and tell me one. I'll let them pick one thing you learned, one thing that you got better at, or one thing that still confuses you. And they can tell me one of those things. And then that gives me immediate feedback about how my students are feeling about, or I'll say on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being, I have no idea what just happened, 2 being, I kind of get it, but I couldn't explain it, and 3 being, I got this, I could take a test on it now. Write how well you understood blah, 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 whatever we did that day. Citing examples or a grammar concept or something. And then I take the piles, and at the end, I can see how many 1s, 2s, and 3s there are. If I have a bunch of 1s and 2s, we need more work. So exit tickets are always a great way. I can also use it for goal setting. I do this at the beginning, middle, and end of each marking period. What do you feel you do well? What do you need better? What do you need me to help you to do better? And you can use a post test. That's always the summative assessment for me. And we're going to talk about those more later. The third activity is providing students with feedback that moves them forward. So effective feedback that should help the writer. It should gauge their performance relative to the criteria for success. So if we've established the criteria for the success, we've looked at samples, and now you're doing some writing, where are you in relation to where you need to be? The feedback should identify what should be done to close that gap between the current performance and the learning goal. So if the success criteria is here and you're here, what do we need to close this gap? What else do you need? And then effective feedback should also suggest ways to get there. So not just what you should do, but how are you going to do it? There are 3 kinds of feedback, and you should use all 3. You should not just do one of these. You have direct feedback, which we call directives, when you explicitly tell students what you need to do to improve. Change this, fix this. Directives. You have facilitative feedback, which is either questions or information that you give the student that guides them to developing their own understanding of what they're supposed to do to improve. And then you have praise, which basically just tells them what they did well and doesn't help move them forward. However, it is really important to remember that while praise does not necessarily help students fix things specifically, Giving praise in addition to giving the other two kind helps a student's self-confidence know, well, at least I'm not a sucky writer. I do these things well. And because they know that they can do those things well, it makes them want to use your questions or information or directives and make the rest of their writing better as well. So here's some examples. Direct feedback. One directive might be start your paragraph with a clear topic sentence if it doesn't have one. Or you could ask, what did you mean here? And if they have to explain it to you, you might say, then you might go to your directive, write that down. Or you might inform them that, oh, each reason needs to be elaborated with facts and evidence. That gives them information of what to do. And of course, praise is like, nice work, you've really improved, you rock, those kind of things. You should also vary the focus of your feedback across lower and higher level skills. So you don't want to focus everything just on lower level skills, even though those might be the easiest because they're the most obvious, like spelling, capital letters, punctuation, sentence structure. We always called that the red pen problem, right? Like you get a paperback and you see tons of red markings and circles, and it's almost all pointing out lower level skills. And almost all of those things should be caught in the editing process. So you do want to point those things out, especially if they're handing you a published piece. But you don't want to focus only on that. And in fact, on all of my writing that I collect from students, sometimes I don't grade those things at all, or I won't make comments on them at all, or I'll point it out, but I don't. It has nothing to do with their score because I'm not assessing their lower level skills. I'm assessing their thinking about what we read or about thinking about their own writing or something. So it's important to know when and how much you're gonna give feedback on those things. Same with higher level skills. You want to make sure that you are addressing their word choice, their organization, their ideas, elaboration, and style. All of these things, most of these lower level things are in the conventions part of the 6+1 writing, other than no, I think most of these are in the formatting, usually is in the publishing part, but the rest of this is, or the presentation part, I'm sorry. The rest of this is all in conventions. The higher level skills, you've got word choice, organization, ideas, and elaboration are traits, and then style is kind of like your voice. Area. So you've got all of the different, you want to just make sure you give feedback across all of the areas. You also want to provide feedback that focus on their writing strategies. Research shows us that struggling writers don't tend to plan out their writing, and they use revision time just to make superficial changes like, oh yeah, I need a capital letter in this name, or I went through and I put some commas in, and they don't actually make substantive changes during the revision process. So it's important to provide feedback during the planning, the drafting, the revising, and editing stages. So that might look like the examples I gave here. Remember that when we're planning, effective writers use or first brainstorm what they know about a topic and then pick the ideas they know most about. So, I'm doing this a lot right now because we went through the whole writing process and I taught all the processes with narrative writing first quarter. And now we're coming back with informative writing, informational writing. And I'm reminding some of my students, remember how we made lists? Remember how we made a writing territories list about all the things that you know or want to write about. Effective writers go back to that. They change things, they modify things, and then they pick. And then they do quick writes about that. So we're constantly providing feedback in the planning. And then the drafting. What do good writers do? Look for the areas that need more details when they're revising. Don't just look for spelling errors. And then also make sure that you increase the frequency and immediacy of feedback. Immediate feedback is better than delayed feedback. That every research in the world knows that. And I will admit that this is where I struggle as an educator, because I overburden myself with lots of other tasks, and my feedback to students, as you all might be feeling it right now, tends to be more delayed than immediate. And that is definitely an area, even 20 years in, that I am still working on. Short writing is easier to offer feedback on quickly. This is a lesson I've learned as an English teacher over the years, that the short stuff is easier for me to give immediate feedback on to my students. And peer review is a beautiful thing for helping you give immediate feedback. Which leads us to the fourth activity, which is engaging students as peer support. Peer review is defined as a reciprocal process in which students read, review, evaluate, and provide feedback on one another's writing. You all are actually engaged in this right now with your statements of your philosophy of teaching statements that you are reading each other's. It makes feedback time quicker, because there would have been no way that I could have read through all of yours, given you all really good feedback, handed them back to you, had given you enough time to revise, and then had you turn them in. I'm just one person. You guys working together makes it go a lot quicker. It helps students become familiar with the criteria for success, because they have to look at those rubrics, and they have to look at those checklists that you devised. And it helps them with self-reflection. As they're reading someone else's, it helps them reflect upon their own. Let me say this. Peer review either works wonderfully and it is a lifesaver, or it is a raging dumpster fire and helps nobody and creates more chaos than anything, and kids just fill out things. It really has to be taught well and modeled well for it to work. Otherwise, it's not helpful for anybody. And I say this as someone who has had raging dumpster fire revision peer review sessions with her students. Students need instruction on how to give feedback. You can follow the kind of gradual release model for this, where the teacher uses a think aloud modeling to demonstrate the process of reviewing, evaluating, and providing feedback on student writing. The I do, you watch. This generally looks like me asking a student, may I use your writing? Will you please be my guinea pig? And I usually use someone from that class. And it works best if I have an odd number of students in the class, because then, I always tell them, you're going to have the best feedback in the class because it's coming from the teacher. And they're like, okay. And usually I pick someone who isn't my best writer in the class, but who is super comfortable being the center of attention of the class. For younger grades, it might be better to use, a paper from a previous year with no name on it. It's really up to how comfortable you are with your students. So I'll slap that up there under my document camera, and I will do a think aloud as I give feedback. And I'll have the students. It's funny because as I get through the essay a little bit, students will be on the edge of their seats wanting to add to what I'm saying. And I'm like, you're just watching. Usually I do give them a copy of the essay for them to go through, and a lot of them will make the same notes that I make. That way they have a model in front of them of something. Younger grades, they might not be able to do that. The second thing is the teacher enlists students help reviewing, evaluating, and offering feedback on unknown grade level peers. The I do and you help me. So oftentimes I will find this is where I take papers from years past, take off the student's name, make copies, hand it out, and we go through it together. Or I have them do sections in groups, and then we bring it together and, kind of discuss. We also call this range finding. I used to do this with high schoolers with ACT style writing. We would look at at the exemplars that ACT handed out of what meets their rubrics, and then we would grade or score, I guess I should say, according to that as a class. And so I've gotten pretty good at doing this with students and getting them honed in on what is the success criteria and what does it look like and how can I provide feedback for that. So once you do the I do and you watch, and then the I do and you help, then you give it during like whole class instruction. Students take the lead on peer reviewing papers. It might be an unknown peer. It could be someone they do know. I generally, again, like to give out a sample essay of someone that they don't know with a name off of it from a previous year. And then they do it either in pairs or depending on at what point we're on by the end of the year with argumentative essays and things. Generally, I can give it to them on their own because they've done it in groups before. And then I walk around and kind of help out. And then after that, the students conduct peer review either anonymously or with an identified kind of partner. And they do it, and I watch them do it and make sure that everybody's doing it fairly in the way they're supposed to. And then lastly, students can start self-evaluating their own writing and make their own plans for improving their writing during revision. I like this last one, but because it's independent practice for their own papers, but I don't think that my goal is ever to get past number 4. I think my goal is always to do 4 and 5. I want students to self-evaluate their own writing, but I always want them to get at least one other peer's feedback as well. You want to highlight the qualities of effective feedback. So your feedback amount. This is something for both you and for peer reviewers. More is not always better. A comment on every single thing is not always great. Circling every single thing that's wrong, marking everything that could be improved tends to be overwhelming even for good students. So I often will tell students, you can mark if you see a lot of capital letter issues, maybe circle a couple and just make a note and say, check capital letters. But then I also tend to, with 8th graders especially, I pick 1 or 2 things that I want them to focus on and have them only make comments on those. So I'll say, what I want you to focus on is finding 2 things that would help this reader the most from this list of things. And those things might be, clear claim, good introduction, uses transition words, has, all of these things. And I'd say pick 2. Pick 2 that you feel that the writer needs to improve on, even if you think they need to improve on all of them. Pick 2 that would help their writing the most, because otherwise getting all of that feedback only makes the writer feel terrible. Then you want to focus your feedback on higher level writing concerns. A lot of students really only want to circle misspellings and capital letters because, let's face it, they stick out and it's easiest. And you don't have to come up with what to say about that. You can just say, fix your spelling. Whereas you want them to look at some of the higher level writing skills like style or word choice and be able to say, this doesn't sound right. Maybe if you reworded it, or instead of using said 37 times in your narrative, why don't you open a thesaurus? No, they shouldn't be rude. But, suggest things. Use specific praise. I often tell students they're not allowed to use the word like when they're given, or nice, or anything like, or good, or anything like that when they're reviewing a student's paper. They have to be specific. You can't say, I like this. You have to say, the reasons you gave were really convincing. And we talk about what useful praise looks like and what not useful praise looks like, and how you can't just give 37 pieces of praise and a maybe change this word, because that's also not helpful. And then you want to position the feedback so it can be seen and used. So whether you're having students use rubrics, checklists, whatever, you want it to be useful to the writer. So you want them to be able to read the comments and know what they have to work on, but also know where the comments go in the essay. So that's going to be kind of up to grade level and what you use. Often I will have my students either I'll print their essays and have them write directly on them as the peer reviewer, or I will have them share their essays with each other on Google Docs. I did this more in high school, and then use the comment feature. I find with 8th grade middle school, it works better if they write on somebody's paper, hand it to them, and then they can make the changes or revisions. And lastly, you want to use mixed ability and homogeneous peer review groups. So you want to use both. The research really supports both. They say using mixed ability is good because often we're using the lower level struggling writers benefit from the reading the higher level skills, and the higher level writers benefit from being able to read through the lower levels, and so they work well together. But homogeneous peer review groups work well too. It's really just important, I think, to know your students and to work with their personalities that complement each other. It's not worth putting two kids together that are going to either not do their work or just say, this is nice on each other's paper because they're afraid of each other or something. So it's really important to know your kids when you're pairing them up. All right, the last activity is helping students take ownership of their learning. So this focuses on self-regulation, which is one's ability to direct and coordinate one's thoughts, emotions, and actions toward the pursuit of a goal. So we want to help students set individual goals based on the feedback and everything and the formative assessments that they've been given. Performance-based should be meaningful and individualized. Like what goals will that student set based on their performance of like what their outcomes of their grades. And then process-based, what part of the process do they need to work on? We want to teach students to self-evaluate. You can do that by giving them their post-test and then handing them back their pre-test or whatever here's your first draft, here's your publishing draft, and look at it. What changed? What did they do well? How did they grow and learn? And then provide opportunities to self-evaluate and revise their writing, because reading over and then revising their writing is the only way that they're going to learn to make their writing better. All right, so that was formative assessment. Most of the time, you're going to spend time doing formative assessment because that's what you're doing all day, every day. If a principal walks in to do an evaluation of you, one of the things they're looking for is what are their learning targets for today and what are their success criteria and how are they evaluating to see if students are meeting that success criteria. So, for instance, when I'm evaluated, if it's not evident to the observer how I'm seeing whether or not my students are meeting what I'm trying to teach, my principal will ask in his form, how are you assessing students' learning of this? How are you assessing their ability to do X, Y, and Z? Which I like in our new evaluation system because it gives me a chance to explain, because it's possible that we went over how I will do that the day before in class and he didn't see that, or that we went over it before he walked in. But you should be doing some sort of formative assessment every day in everything that you do, because that's what informs whether or not they get it and how you're doing teaching it. Assessment for evaluation is going to be your summative. or the cumulative assessments. Those are the ones that are generally the grade that students get at the end of a unit or a marking period on something. It's usually the finished task that compares their writing against whatever the benchmark or standard is to see how the student lives up to it. And these tend to be the high stakes graded assignments that we put in our grade book, or that when we're doing report cards, we make comments about how they are on finished tasks. So summative and cumulative mean the same thing. They're basically teacher evaluating the final draft of something. And that brings us to your assignment this week. In e-learning, there are 5 samples of 3rd grade writing. I'm actually going to take you into e-learning right here, unless I've gotten kicked out of it for some reason. Okay, here we are. So we're in Assessing Student Writing, which is Module 11. I actually created a submodule here for this assignment called Assessing Student Writing. Your assignment is going to be right here. It's this Word document here. The reason we're doing this is to give you experience with elementary student writing and assessment. You're going to choose one of the student samples listed to read and assess using the 6+1 traits rubric, which is also in here. You're going to then write a 1-page explanation for how you graded the sample and why you graded it that way. All of the samples are from 3rd grade writers writing to this prompt. Sometimes classrooms have a class pet. Explain what animal you would choose for your class pet and why. And then I'll talk about that submission process here in a second. So if you go back here to our sub module, you will find, this is a link that shows how to assess the 6+1 writing the writing traits. So if you are to go here, I really like this because it shows that it's on a scale of 1 to 6, 1 being not yet, 2 is emerging, 3 is developing, 4 is effective, 5 is strong, 6 is wow. And it gives you kind of an idea for what that looks like. So a 5 would be this paper is clear and focused. Oh, for ideas. 5 under ideas would be it's clear and focused, holds the reader's attention, relevant anecdotes and details, enrich the central theme. And then these are some subcategories that it's narrow and manageable, relevant telling quality details, such and such and such. And they have this, and then what does a kind of an average paper look like? The writer is beginning to define the topic, even though the development is still basic or general. And then what does not yet look like? There's no sense of purpose or central theme. And it goes through for each. For organization, what is great, average, not yet? What do those look like? So it goes through all of the traits, and it kind of tells you what those should look like. So I like that for that, because that will give you it'll inform when you do this for your students. So you'll pick a sample, and this is what the rubric looks like that you'll be using. So what you can do is there are 2 ways you can do this. You can download this and have it be your own document that you type on, resave, and down here you can type your 1-page thing. So you can, you download it, you fill in all of these things, and then you create a second page where you type your explanation, save it, upload it to Dropbox, or you can print this, handwrite your responses on here, scan it back in, and upload it to Dropbox, and then write your 1-page explanation on a separate document and upload that as well to Dropbox. Your choice how you want to do that. But this is or you can recreate the rubric, I guess. But this is the 6+1 writing test rubric. You'll tell me what sample you decided to do, and then what you give each of the areas, each of the traits, and then overall, looking back at what you graded each of the traits on, what would you give the overall sample? Beyond expectations, amazing, or not yet, or somewhere in between. And then these, if we go back here, this is the Dropbox for it, writing assessment project. And then these are the samples right here. So you can go, they are not in any particular order. They are all right here. They're all expository writing, informational writing, of course, because they are talking about pets. So that is your assignment for this week, is to do that. And then if you look in our overall module, so that I created the assessing student writing, all of this as its own little sub module, so it's all in its own space. Up here, I also gave you an overview of the traits. In case you're still struggling a little bit with the 6 traits, this was a PowerPoint that was shared with me, that another professor uses in her 3690 class, that I thought was pretty informative and might be a good resource for you if you're still wanting more information on the 6 traits. And then also I linked to the Common Core State Standards here, to their Appendix C, which gives, you kind of have to, you go to the thing here, it will give you exemplars of student writing. So for instance, if you wanted to, besides the assignment that we're doing, if you wanted to look at writing, quote unquote, exemplar writing, in the grade level that you are interested in teaching, they have an opinion, an informative, and a narrative exemplar in each of the grade levels. Although it looks like maybe they don't have they don't have an opinion one for first grade. Anyway, they don't have all 3 for every grade, but they do have some. So for instance, if you scroll down here, here's the first one. It's kindergarten opinion piece that a kid wrote, and then it gives you an annotation, the writer of the piece, and then here's another student sample and the annotation, like what they do well in each of those, and so on and so forth. So, and then here's the student sample, a narrative by a kindergartner. Here is the writer of this piece, what they did well, and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in looking at more student writing, that is, like I've said before, one of the drawbacks of being online and COVID and all of those things, is that I can't put you into classrooms. I can't provide you interactions with real kids and their writing. So this is hopefully at least somewhat informative for that. So reminders of your assignments this week. You're going to respond to articles of the week 19 and 20. 20 will be up sometime on Monday. Taylor and Maylee are going to get us articles of the week numbers 21 and 22. You are not going to do that over Thanksgiving. I mean, you can. You can do it over Thanksgiving, but you do not have to. They're not due then. You're going to watch and respond to my interview, which will be up on Monday. And you will submit your peer response feedback if you haven't done so already. And your actual bigger assignment for this week is to do the assessing student writing. If you have questions, please let me know. Shoot me an email. I apparently will be in front of my computer all week because we are remote learning. So I will be sure to see your email. So enjoy and stay safe.